I don't know how hard we can push. We are exhausted. We're barely holding on. And we all have slightly different experiences and we're dealing with different things at home. But my gosh, have a little compassion, right? Show a little empathy for the team.
Welcome to Daring Breakthroughs, the podcast obsessed with helping professionals at all levels build unstoppable confidence, gain crystal clarity, and create powerful networking connections to give you a competitive edge. We share practical strategies and inspiring stories from daring people who have achieved remarkable breakthroughs. I know that if you can see it, you can be it, because I navigated my own career from Walmart to Wall Street. And my friend, you can too. I'm your host and the author of Break Up, Break In, Break Through, Jenn Landis. Today we are joined by Heather Powers. She is the founder and CEO of The Power Lane, a consultancy that works with leaders and mothers. She strongly believes that organizations can accelerate toward their business and revenue goals with more effective engagement and retention of working mothers. And we all know that to be true, but Heather is proving it. She's a former corporate executive with over 30 years experience growing and leading teams in large management consulting firms. She now coaches, speaks, and consults on systemic changes moms need to better integrate their personal and professional lives. Drawing on her experiences as a working mother for over 19 years and a business leader for much longer, she knows this work provides the best return on investment for businesses. Heather's breakthrough moment was well into the pandemic, holding it together at home with 2 teenagers and at work with a team of parents with young children. She was repeatedly reprimanded for not pushing the team hard enough, determined to do better for her family and the families around her. She left corporate to make the changes needed to support moms and all caregivers. Her current focus is helping moms and leaders build workplace villages that enable them to thrive at both work and at home. We were never meant to do this alone. So why do we keep trying? Heather, I have the benefit of talking to you on a regular basis. I am so blessed and fortunate to have that opportunity, but our listeners don't know you. So I've just shared with them your background, but I always like to hear your story in your words, and I'm sure they will too. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and also your pandemic moment? I want to dig into that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for having me, Jen. And I certainly am thrilled to be part of your friend group as well. I get a lot more out of it than I think you realize. So I grew up in rural New Hampshire, and my mom was always a working mom, and I saw how hard that was, but also the village that she built around the family, and that was pretty critical. To me, that was normal, right? Until I was starting my own family and trying to figure this out. I have always enjoyed solving problems. I love puzzles, and I view the work ahead of me as one big puzzle to work on, which I think keeps it interesting and fresh. So when I became a mom and realized, oh gosh, right, there are a lot more than just the logistics to this. I was fortunate to have been supported not just by my husband, but by really great colleagues and supervisors, and really had wonderful mentors around me for many years of my career. And honestly, I wouldn't have achieved what I did without all of that support. And then it was, as you mentioned, in the pandemic, new team, new project, and it was tough, right? The pandemic had a lot of breakthroughs for all of us. We had a lot of time to think. We had a lot of time to explore, but we were also crazy, just sort of keeping the lights on and doing the work that we needed to do. And my particular breakthrough moment was the fall of 21. And so we were trying to get back into things, right? School had opened up with a lot of restrictions. Daycare was starting to open up. And a lot of the people on my team had young kids, and they had either been virtually schooling or, had 2 or 3 generations in the house to care for everybody. And I remember a particular moment where I had just hung up with a mom with young kids, and she was saying how she and her husband didn't have the village, right? It was just them. And the kids were getting sick. And it was in that cycle of one gets sick and then gets better and then the other gets sick. And it was just going through the house week after week. She was continuing to do a really good job. And I switched from that, I thought, empowering, really good conversation to my supervisor at the time, who's like, yeah, you're not pushing the team hard enough. Like, we're just not meeting our goals. And I was like, I don't know how hard we can push. We are exhausted. We're barely holding on. And we all have slightly different experiences and we're dealing with different things at home. But my gosh, have a little compassion, right? Show a little empathy for the team. And it was at that point, I literally called my coach at the time and said, we need to work on an exit strategy. I can't continue in this environment for lots of reasons. Yeah, but a big one was I was no longer supported. And so it was time to go where I was.
One of the things I've always admired about your work, Heather, is that we all know that we need women in the workplace, we need diversity in the workplace, we need talent in all various stages and all walks of life.
Okay.
But we don't often shine a light, a positive light, on caregivers, on moms. And I think in today's world, caregiver in particular has a much more, almost a broader meaning, because we're not just talking about moms with small children at home. Very often, moms with kiddos at home also have aging parents that they're supporting. So they're being pulled on both ends.
Right.
And it's not just moms, it's also dads. And, it can be single moms, it can be single dads. Like, there's this whole world of caregivers that we in corporate have a tendency to just kind of, I don't want to say overlook, but we kind of take it for granted, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, the recent data is that 75% of today's employees are caregivers in some capacity. And so immediately, as you say, right, we often think of parents, okay, moms and dads. And that's certainly a big part of that 75%. But we also have, as you mentioned, aging parents. We see caregivers, employees who are caring for a sister or a brother who needs a bit more support, maybe an aunt or uncle who doesn't have family nearby, even neighbors. In our neighborhood, we've rallied around a single neighbor who needed support for her cancer journey. And so when you think about 3/4 of the workforce in some kind of caregiving role, it's not just a mom issue, right? It becomes a real business issue. And
yeah.
I think that's another thing that to me was really emphasized during the pandemic of, if you don't have the right workers, you're not going to hit your business goals. And so that's been sort of the tactic I've been taking in these conversations is, to your point, we need the diversity. We need all of these folks participating in the workforce. But the bottom line is where people actually start to pay attention. And so if you think about it from a talent availability and a talent productivity perspective, it sometimes gets more of an ear. So really thinking about, if your employees are not able to actually do their job because of caregiving responsibilities, they're going to leave. And they still have opportunities to go elsewhere. It's not like they have to hold on to the job they have because there's nothing else out there.
Yeah.
So putting it in a business perspective, I think helps.
Absolutely. I mean, like you were talking about retention, it's so important. And let's go back to the pandemic here for a minute, because you're so right. I feel like the pandemic stopped us all in our tracks, right? I think we live lives with some inertia, right? It's easier to just keep doing the thing than it is to stop and figure out what we want and change directions, right? I think that's why a lot of us stay in jobs that make us miserable, because it's just easier than going through the effort of trying to figure out what that next career is going to be or what that next position is going to be. And so the pandemic forced all of us, an entire society, a world of people to stop in their tracks. And then when we had to make the conscious decision about what we were going to start back up again, our priorities globally had shifted.
Right.
And some of that, I feel like we started understanding the benefits of connection again.
Yes.
Because we'd gotten so disconnected.
Yes.
So this idea of a workplace village is something that I think is perhaps more poignant now than it was even pre-pandemic. So let's talk a little bit more about workplace village, because it certainly paints a picture when we talk about that. But I want to know exactly what do you mean by that? And how do people know if they have a workplace village, if they don't, or perhaps even if their workplace village is healthy or not?
Right. That's a great point. So it comes from the idea of it takes a village to raise a child. And I think most of us are familiar with that phrase and that concept, and probably agree with that. Again, never meant to do it alone. So why are we trying? And as I was writing the book, I was thinking about, and I've been guilty of this myself, where we look at leaders and we expect leaders to be the ones setting the culture and maintaining the culture, and almost giving permission for us to do X, Y, or Z. And I realized that we all, regardless of whether we're new to the workforce, an individual contributor, maybe a team lead, or the leader or the executive, we all have a role and we all can contribute to that culture. And the workplace village is the idea of, regardless of what your role is at work, someone around you knows what you're doing. Clearly, you need to be checking in, submitting your time, getting expense reports approved, and so forth. So making sure that relationship is healthy, and then those around you. So we all have work, or obligations rather, outside of work. And so whether that's a doctor appointment or registering your car, caring for your kids, taking your parent to an appointment, those are things that happen during work hours typically. Again, we all have those, so it's not just a parent phenomenon, right? And if we think about it that way and say, so who's going to step in, or who's going to make sure things are covered while I'm, off at the appointment, or, at DMV or whatever it may be, and think about it from that perspective, then it becomes more of a community, becomes more of that village, and we all have that same goal of getting the work done and supporting one another while we're doing it. So the test of whether you have a healthy village, if what you're in is a supportive culture or not, would be, oh my gosh, there's something urgent, and who am I going to call to make sure that's covered while I'm unavailable? And if we don't have that immediate in mind, that would be one of the first things I recommend we do. Who do we call? Who are we going to say, I can't come in because I'm sick, or, the furnace broke, and the repairman's coming this morning. Again, we all have those situations in life. And so those are great examples for us to be thinking about who is part of our village and how are we sustaining it.
So what advice, Heather, would you have for someone who is listening to you and they're saying, wow, that would be nice.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that. And I don't have that. How should someone start the process of building a village? Because sometimes you have to build it in order to have what you need, right?
Right.
So what advice would you have for that individual?
Well, the first thing would be to, again, look around and who do you interact with most at work? And what do you know about what they have going on outside of work? Again, lots of examples. Maybe they're coaching the local t-ball team or something. And if you have a sense of what they have, offering, is there something I can help while you're going to practice? Is there a way I can support while you're caring for or dealing with X, Y, or Z? And that's a great place to start. In my book, I do offer other examples of ways to, again, step in and say, I'm willing to help, or is there something I can do to, make this load lighter while you're dealing with X, or while you're pulled, could even just be do another work assignment or another work project. And the more we can ask and support one another, then when we have an ask, it doesn't feel as hard to ask that colleague, and we're sort of building that rapport along the way.
So as you're speaking, Heather, I'm thinking about, community
Right.
and the need for community. And really, workplace village is a form of a community.
Absolutely.
But sometimes your community isn't just in the place that you work. It's also outside of your work. So do you recommend that people have two? Like you have your external, and then while you're building your internal village? I mean, how do you think about the external versus internal component of that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think depending on the roles that you play in your work, I definitely would think of the workplace village as close to work as possible, because sometimes you just aren't able to pull in external people to support that. But on the flip side, there are cases where you have something going on at work and you have to call, and I've done this many times. You call a neighbor to pick up the kids because I just can't. There's a meeting running late, or we need to work on a project or something, and that's a great example of where the external and the internal sort of meld. And so it gets a little specific to the situation, but there are certainly things where you can call on the people outside of work to help you really integrate those work and personal lives.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the story you shared earlier about the woman who said, she really didn't have support besides she and her husband.
Right.
And I know my sister, we talk about this frequently because she doesn't have family near her. And it's been a real challenge for her as she is a vice president in a company, and she's got 3 growing kiddos, and her husband works as well. And there's a lot of life happening in that household. Yes. And there's a lot of life happening in most households. Yes. And we need as much support as we can get. So let's pivot the conversation a little and let's talk to leaders. So you were a leader in an organization and you were trying to create that workplace village, and you didn't have support for that. And you stood in the gap between your team and the powers that be in order to buffer, as leaders often do. We often have to buffer. Right. So talk to the leader who's frustrated, who wants to create that workplace village, but maybe it's not as embraced by, I hate to say the higher ups, because you and I were both higher ups at one point in time, but I think we understand the concept, right? So talk to that leader who wants to create this, and either they're facing resistance or they're just not sure how to open that conversation with their manager.
Right. So I think the first thing to do is look around and say, who is on my team? And that can be a team of 2 or 3, it can be a team of 50. But who do I work with most closely? And what's going on in their lives? And it doesn't have to be a completely open book, right? You're not trying to force everyone to share things that they prefer not to. But if you keep bringing it back to and using work as sort of the framework of discussion to say, here's our schedule, here's what we have, we hope to accomplish this week, this month, and what obstacles do you potentially see? And again, we all have things in our lives, whether it's a vacation or an appointment, and being able to share that to the level your team members are comfortable, and be able to work around that. Say, okay, great, we'll make sure you can leave early for that, or you're covered. We have someone ready to cover for that particular meeting, whatever the case may be. And that starts to build the trust of, okay, if I share that, I'm not going to get dinged for these life events. There's a cooperation here. And the more we do that, the more people come forward and feel comfortable saying, I need a little flexibility, maybe Friday afternoons, or gosh, this came up, but I've been working closely with Sally and she's got it covered, and I'll circle back, later tonight or tomorrow when I'm free again to make sure everything's okay. And so, like everything, right, it comes down to communication. And so building that trusted environment for people where they feel comfortable to say, I have this going on at home, and these are the details as I can share them, or I'm still working through the details. But it's really open the communication and making people feel like they're not going to be penalized for sharing some of that, some of what they're dealing with at home.
Yeah, we often spoke about that as psychological safety in our organization, right? Yep. People have to feel safe in order to test out trust
Yes.
before they will fully trust.
Right.
So what about that leader who's having the conversation? Like if you could talk to you back when you were being reprimanded for not pushing your team hard enough, is there anything you would do differently or any advice you would give to the leader that now finds themselves in that situation? Having done the research that you've done, knowing, what you know now, what advice might you give to either a former version of yourself or the person who finds themselves there today?
Yeah. So I think two things. One, being authentic, right? Again, not sharing things that you're not comfortable sharing, but also finding the line of sharing enough so your leader knows what's going on and has a sense of all is not perfect. And not that perfect is the right word either, but all is not well at home. And so there might be something else on her mind. So that sort of authenticity of sharing enough, and it can be vague, but sharing enough so the leader knows what's going on or that there is something that needs to be worked through. And the second is, I say vulnerable, but it's really, sharing examples of where you have worked through some of those situations. And I think back to some of the leaders I did have, and I was much more open with them. And it was certainly because that psychological safety was there. And in this particular instance, I can remember months leading up to the moment I just described where I'd share things and it would almost be brushed off. Like, oh, don't worry about that. Oh, my daughter went through something similar. And it was like, I haven't even shared any details. How can you possibly brush it off? You don't even know what we're going through. And so immediately, like the walls start to go up and you're like, okay, why would I share more if that's going to be the reaction I get?
Yeah. I would also encourage people to get your book because you lay out a business case, as we talked about at the beginning of our discussion. And sometimes if leaders are incapable of understanding the softer side for one reason or another, or you just can't get their attention on it as you're just describing, right, being brushed off, sometimes they will listen to the business case. Like
Right.
if we don't do this, then the negative impact to the business is a loss of talent, turnover, increased training dollars. Like you talk about a lot of that in your book, and you actually give numbers and studies that people can use to cite so they don't have to do their own research. You've already done the research for them. So that would be another thing that I would say that I know you won't promote for yourself, but I'm going to promote it for you and say, get her book because there's a good business case for the support that you're talking about and that is needed. And at the end of the day, it makes the organization stronger and better.
Exactly. And I think, I knew for a while that I was going to do something to help working moms, and it's broadened to help all caregivers and really all employees. But when I was crafting the book, it really hit me that, again, to the studies and research that you've just referenced, there's a lot of great data out there around why we want more diverse populations in the workforce and the benefit that those different perspectives bring. Even studies that show if you have a quarter, even half, or ideally up to 0.5% of your executives are women, financially you do much better as an organization. So again, the data is there. And I really think we're at a unique time where, unfortunately, we don't have unlimited pools of talent. I mean, I can remember starting my career and it was hold on to the job you got because there weren't that many out there. And so you almost put up with stuff that today you wouldn't consider because it was a job. And the tables have turned. And so now there aren't as many employees out there. And it's still a shock to me, and it shouldn't be, that we aren't taking care of the ones we have because, again, we don't have endless pools to go pull from when our current employees decide to leave. And the diversity conversation has happened and we've had some success, the different perspectives. But I think to your point, when you think about it in a business perspective, the bottom line gets leaders' attention. And there's very little that we can accomplish if we don't have the right people in the right roles. And that's this whole discussion, right? Getting the right people in the right roles and supporting them so that they are able to do the work that you have in front of them.
Yeah. It's interesting because it should be a pretty short conversation, right? 1 + 1 still equals 2. And if you don't have enough people doing the work, then the work's not going to get done. And if the work doesn't get done, then the business can't grow, let alone,
Right.
fulfill its
Sustain
current
revenue.
obligations.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back to your breakthrough, specifically, and let's talk about your support network. You and I both made the conscious decision to leave our corporate lives. We had some things going for us. For one, lots of years of experience and the ability to choose a second career at that point in our lives, but also support. So let's talk about support, because when you pivot to the degree that you've pivoted, again, going back to kind of the workplace village, you don't do that without support. So what was that experience like for you? I mean, how did you feel? Because I mean, what I'm getting at here, Heather, is we stand very often at a precipice and we have to decide, am I going to take this jump? Because it's freaking scary.
It
Like,
is.
I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to land on the other side once I take this leap. And in many ways, you and I talk about the fact that we're still figuring that out, right?
Yeah.
We're a couple years in and we're still figuring this out. So when you were standing there, what was your support system like? What were the things that made you have the courage to do it scared and do it anyway, to pursue that breakthrough?
Yeah, so it's such a great point, and I could not have done this alone. I'll start with my husband. We've been a pair ever since we were first together and then married and having kids, and he was a big part of the discussion because we'd always been a dual income household, and he knew how passionate I was about making these changes, and has been very supportive. Not always understanding what's going on, but been very supportive all along the way. And so that was a huge part. I'll point out the kids because while they don't totally understand what's going on, they are a huge driver. I'm decades into my career, and honestly, the changes I'm trying to see are probably not going to impact me greatly in the rest of my career, but they're the reason I do this, because they're about to enter the workforce. In the next 5-10 years, they will be in the thick of it. And we can't keep working in these structures that were set up by our fathers and grandfathers, that they're just not working, as we've pointed out throughout this. And then the other parts of my village, and I think we all probably have girlfriends we go to. I would count you in that group, speed dial, text, whatever, checking in regularly. That's been that group of women, and it ebbs and flows, sort of depending on where we are, but it's a core group that I can go to with as a sounding board for ideas, as a testing lab for my offers and feedback on what that might look like. And then as part of my cheerleading squad, when I hit milestones and want to celebrate with someone who's been through it or been in something similar and appreciates just how hard it was to get to that point. So it's been absolutely critical. And then I'd also throw in actual formal coaching. So along the way, I've had some great executive coaching coaches supporting me both in one-on-one and some group environments. And that's also been instrumental. Some of those days when you're like, why am I doing this? What, is there a light at the end of this tunnel? And having the support of that whole village I've just described, one or more will step in and say, you got this. This is just a rough patch. Or, yes, there is light, but you've got, these 3 things more to do, and then you'll get there. That's huge.
I love that. It resonates deeply with me when you talk about your kids and that you're doing this for your kids, and your kids are watching you do this. I'm a big believer that you need to pursue a breakthrough because someone in your life needs to see you break through to believe that it's possible for them. Yep. And so it always, one of the things I learned from being a senior executive was that people are always watching. They were always watching. And I had some really interesting conversations with people who would come up to me afterwards, more junior members on my team. And one of those conversations was, hey, Jenn, just so you know, when we're taking notes in the meeting, we're often taking notes about how you're managing the meeting, not the content of the meeting itself. We're watching how you are navigating the things that are happening. And I got to tell you, when he shared that with me, it creeped me out a little. And we had a conversation about, okay, well, let's make sure we're focused on the content of the meeting first and foremost. But, let's have a conversation about what you're seeing.
Right.
Like, what is it that you're wanting to learn more about? So my point there is that people are always watching. They are always watching. And people that you don't realize are watching are not only watching, but they're being impacted by the choices and the decisions that you're making. And I can't think of a better example of that than moms who are choosing breakthroughs and choosing to create these changes in their lives for the benefit of themselves and their families. Yeah. And they've got these kiddos that are watching them, regardless of the age. I still watch my parents, and I consider myself a kiddo when it comes to them, right? Yeah. People are watching, and your kids are watching. And it's a very powerful, it's a powerful thing to think about, that you have that kind of impact. Yeah,
it is. And I know there are days for other moms out there where you're just like, is anything I do good enough for these kids? And the feedback is, few and far between, at least in the teenage phase I'm in. There was a moment last year that struck me. I'm like, okay, this is why I do this. My daughter's history teacher caught me at school at the end of the year and said, I have to share this with you. And I didn't feel like it was appropriate to put in an email. And it was one of those assignments where they had to write something about someone they admire. And he's like, she wrote a wonderful essay about why she admires you.
Wow.
And I still get choked up thinking about it. 'Cause I'm like, God, I've been battling this then 15-year-old for years. Wow. And just, again, in sort of the mom-daughter way. But okay, to your point, right? She's watching. She sees what I'm doing. So there's an impact, even if we don't actually discuss it. We will at some point.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly it, right? You will at some point.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the richness of that conversation for you and for her when that time comes, when she starts experiencing things herself in the workforce or in life. Yeah. And, she's gonna come back to you to have that conversation. And by then, hopefully you'll be ready for it. I don't know if we're ever ready for some of those conversations.
No.
So as we kind of round out our conversation, what are some final thoughts and some advice, encouragement that you'd like to leave with the caregivers who are trying to juggle this thing we call work and this thing we call life at the same time, and do it with compassion? And I would say self-compassion and compassion for others. What final words would you have for them?
Yeah, that's a great way to wrap this. One is, you're not alone, right? You are not alone, even though some days feel exactly that way. So know that, at a minimum, you have the two of us you can always reach to. But there is someone close to you that would lend a hand or step in. And sometimes we just have to have the courage to ask. And the ask is probably a lot smaller than we think it is. And most people want to help. So you're not alone, and have the courage to ask. And the second thing is, and you just alluded to this, it's having the courage to take that step, because someone's watching. And by you taking that bold step, and maybe the bold step is to ask your colleague or your neighbor for a hand on something, but someone's watching, and they will get the courage to do something bold because they've seen you do that. So, you're not alone, and have the courage for that bold step, whatever that might be.
Such great advice, Heather. And I know it's very heartfelt. How can people find you on social media? Because you post on a regular basis, and you post some wonderfully encouraging things, as well as some real life things. So I think people would probably love to follow you. So how can they find you on social media?
Thank you. Yeah, LinkedIn is my primary social media platform. So it's Heather L. Powers. and we would love to connect with you there. So I have both thepowerlane.com and heatherlanepowers.com. So those are both great ways to connect with me. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, but probably less active there.
One last thing I'd like to make sure that I point out, you do public speak, and you keynote on this address. So if people are looking for a speaker on this topic and they're intrigued by our conversation today, intrigued by the research you've done and the book you've written, The Power Lane, then I would encourage people to also reach out to you if you want to have Heather speak at your next event.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had some great fun talking to audiences about how to support not just moms, but all caregivers.
Yeah, love it. Well, everyone, that is a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining Heather and I for this episode of Daring Breakthroughs. Don't forget to check out the show notes for free tools and links related to this episode. And if you found value in this episode, and I think you probably did, I invite you to review, like, comment, and subscribe. We don't want you to miss the next episode. While you're at it, I'd love to connect with you as well on social media. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me nearly everywhere with the handle Ask Jenn Landis. That's Jenn with 2 N's. And if you need a speaker for your next event, and if you have already had Heather, I'm your girl. Check out my website at jennlandis.com for all the ways we can work together. Once again, that's jennlandis.com. Until next time, share an insight you gained today with a friend, and then apply that insight by making one bold move. I dare you.